Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about starting strong and finishing stronger in terms of project management, because no matter how small the project, there's always planning to do. Okay, so who am I and why am I even qualified to talk about project management? So my name is Paige Zaleppa. I am a 2019 alumni of Towson. I graduated with a degree in information systems, and currently I'm pursuing my master's at Towson, and I will be the class of 2021. I'm currently a product manager and a software developer at Cyber for All, which is a team right here on campus. We build a number of different software products for the cyber ed community, and that's kind of exists as a subset in like the ed tech space. And just a quick fun fact, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, as you can see with my nice little porgs and Baby Yoda. And it's not just because I have the newer movies. My favorite movie is definitely A New Hope. Can't beat that. So I'm here to put you back on schedule like Darth Vader was for the beautiful Death Star that ended up blowing up, but your projects won't. I promise that. So before I kind of get into it, I think it's really important to define what a project is. And me being a software engineer myself and understanding all of that, I always look at a project similar to the way I look at like a JSON object or a class. There's certain attributes of a project. So one of the biggest, and I would argue the most important, is a clear objective. And this is like the tangible end product. So for example, anything you guys are building this weekend at the hack-A-Thon, you know, it's an app or a script or the robot or whatever you guys are building that's really cool. And in order for you to complete that objective, you have to have some tasks. And these are anything that need to be completed. And the one key thing that I know my software engineering and software professor would stress is they have to be completed in a specific order. You can't test your app if you never have one. So that's kind of a key piece to always remember. I'm going to move my lamp to stop hitting it with my hands. The next thing would be your resources. So in terms of what you guys are working on this weekend, this is you actually coding. Any of the scripts that you're bringing in from outside, GitHub resources, NPM packages, you know, Python packages or anything of that nature. And also anywhere you're actually coding. So your laptop, your room, the snacks you're going to eat, all of that falls into a resource of a project. And a project, not a resource, has a specific time frame. So there's a finite life for a project. And for you guys, it's about 48 hours. You have from noon on Friday until noon on, I believe, Sunday to get in your projects and write everything. So that would be the specific time frame. A project is unique. And what I mean by unique doesn't necessarily mean that it's very special or it's new and really fancy. It just means that what you're doing has never been done at the time that you're doing it in the way that you're doing it, because nothing can ever be built or coded or architected in the same way twice. Even if you follow word for word some form of a tutorial online or docs, nothing will ever be the same. And the last piece is there's always a degree of uncertainty. There's always some assumption that you're going to make at the very beginning. And the final thing, the degree of uncertainty, I don't know how much you guys caught, but there's always assumptions. So you're always going to have things that you don't know that you're just going to have to assume. So you're just going to have to assume I'll figure out how to get this database connected. I'll figure out how to get this function working. So that's kind of where that degree of uncertainty comes in. And the next piece that's really important with any type of project you're kind of going into is constraints. And these are the most common constraints. I'm really going to focus on the top 4 because the last 3 don't really fall into the purview of a hackathon project. But just so you guys are aware, if you guys ever study project management in the future, or if somebody asks you on like a random quiz show, I can at least give you those answers. So the ones I'll be focusing on are scope, quality, schedule, and resources. And then the last 3 are just budget, risk, and customer satisfaction, which when you guys get into industry or if you guys are ever working for another person, those 3 are extremely important. So, scope. I know you guys have probably heard this in your classes. You have to scope your project, or you have the scope of a homework assignment or anything of that nature. And all this basically means is all the work that needs to be done in order to fulfill the project objective, which I talked about. So you know, if I decide I'm going to build an app that's going to deliver me all of my emails that I got in the past hour in JSON objects. That's going to be the scope. I'm going to say, okay, I need to figure out what has to go in order to get that objective done. So maybe I'm going to need a backend. Maybe I'm going to need a front end. Maybe I'm going to need a database. You don't really know. But as you go into the project, it's very important to define this prior to starting any kind of code. Obviously, scope can change as you move through things. You might think, oh, I don't need a database, but then you start working and you're like, yeah, maybe I do need one. And then at which point you can scope accordingly. And since you guys are working on really short projects, or even like your class projects that are also relatively short in comparison to ones you'll do in industry, your scope is going to change a little bit. So you have to be a little bit flexible. So I'm going to have a running example of a cheese sandwich for all of this. So within the scope of me making a cheese sandwich for myself, I might have to shop for the ingredients, prepare the ingredients, make the sandwich, eat the sandwich, clean the dishes. Now, obviously, I can go ahead and scope the problem and say, I'm not going to be the one to do the dishes, so that's not a part of this. So I'm just going to say I'm not going to do that. So that's kind of an example of where scope is coming from there. And it's always very important, as my meme says here, you have to define the scope, because you need to be able to identify when you're going outside of that, especially in small projects like the ones you guys are going to be completing. The next key piece is quality. Now, this can mean a lot of different things, but at its core, it's basically when we implement all of those things that we just talked about in the scope, we have to make sure that we're meeting them to a certain quality standard. So, if you guys all decide on your teams or as an individual, I want to comment every single one of my functions, or I want to, have purple buttons for all of my inputs on my UI, those are some examples of quality, how you're going to implement the scope. So for a cheese sandwich, I might say, well, I want it made with fresh bread, and I want it with cheese that's been aged 3 years and cut in perfect equilateral triangles. And these things are just super important after you've done the scope to define, okay, are we going to have any quality standards? Some projects, will have very few. A lot of them will have a ton. There is so many documents and stuff going into getting down to the nitty gritty of what size font you need to use in the UI, or, a certain route structure for your backend. So there's a lot of pieces that could go into this. Next would be your schedule. So this is going to specify when specific tasks need to start and finish. Now, obviously, schedules aren't perfect. So there's a lot of things that go into this that I won't get into in this presentation. But at the heart of it, you just need to know, okay, I'm going to start this at 2:00 p.m. and I'm going to finish it at 6 p.m. And if you go over by 7, make sure you're looking at the schedule to make sure that isn't going to hurt you too badly. So the key here at beginning is really focusing on where to find that schedule and work it into what you need to get done. So for example, my cheese sandwich, I might need to determine when I'm going to start and finish shopping, and start and finish preparing ingredients, start and finish preparing the sandwich, and so on and so forth. So that I can say, okay, I want to eat my sandwich at 7 p.m. tonight. So I'm probably going to have to go to the store before 7 p.m. in order to be able to eat the sandwich at 7. So making sure you're working from that point. And typically scheduling is done from basically end to beginning. So looking at, okay, I have 48 hours to complete this project. I need to get it in by noon on Sunday. Okay, I know I'm going to need 2 hours to figure out X, and I know I'm going to need 3 hours just to do research on a stack. And you can build those things in. And this can be extremely informal or extremely formal in the case of like professional project managers. And last but not least, resources. So this is anything that you're going to need to complete a project. And some of the most common ones that people like to list are people, materials, equipment, facilities, and I list time. Obviously, you guys are very limited on time, and time is arguably one of the most valuable resources when it comes to programming or coding or doing any kind of engineering in general. So, for a cheese sandwich, I would need to identify maybe people who are going to get materials, the materials themselves, how much time I have, the facilities that I need to use. Do I need a knife? Do I need a plate? All of those types of things are to be identified kind of towards the beginning of your project and are super important when actually going to execute the project. So next, I know some people might be familiar with the software development lifecycle, which I think you guys will see a lot of commonalities between the project lifecycle and the SDLC. So the project lifecycle, depending on who you're talking to and what book you're reading, it could be 4 or 5 stages. I prefer 4. It simplifies it a little bit, and it also has some really good pieces that I think make a lot more sense than breaking up what they call the execution phase. So the first phase you have is the initiation phase. So this is when you guys are doing project definition, you're identifying the constraints, you're getting together those resources and all that kind of stuff that I had just talked about before. So that's relatively probably short for any project you guys are working on this weekend. After you kind of know what your project is, you have the scope, you know what you need to get, you know what you need to find, you can then move on to planning. Okay, I know what I need, so how am I actually going to get there? So this is going through and figuring out, okay, I know that I need to find a database. I've never worked with one before, so I need 2 hours to go and figure out where I'm going to get that database, how to connect to it, how to interface with it, all that kind of stuff. And then, okay, I need 6 hours to write the API. I need X amount of hours to write the front end. I need so many hours to do a deployment. That kind of happens in here. And then you move into the execution, or like I like to call it the performing phase. So this is when you are, fingers on keyboard, all hands on deck, just coding your hearts out, getting that app working. Now, obviously, you can see that there's cycles here. You can go through many different project life cycles within a project. So you get to the execution phase and you realize, hey, I actually do need a database to store user information. You can always go back and fix your schedule. Just make sure that you're always meeting that end date, which is 12 o'clock. And then finally, closing phase, which probably won't happen for a lot of your projects, but we can use the judging ceremony as a good closing. So this is when you're looking at the project as a whole, how you did, what you did, why you did it, and really digging into like, we did a really good job. Let's celebrate the fact we just did this. So that's really what comes in with closing. So if you're bored right now, I'm really sorry, but I know this is all really interesting information, but how exactly does this process really apply to me and how can I apply it to this weekend? But you can do all of this yourself. Obviously in industry, this stuff you will plan for months. You will be in initiation phase for 3, 4, 5 months. You'll be in planning for 6 months and then execution. I've seen projects that last, 1 all the way up to like 10 years. But obviously that's not your timeline. So there's a couple steps and I've broken it down into 7 here that I hope will help you guys kind of get started in your weekend projects. The first thing you're going to want to do is just establish that project objective. So what do I want to do? Do I want to build an API that will interface with the, an application that already exists? Or do I just want to be able to create a task app or a tic-tac-toe game, anything of that nature? Just make sure you get that solid before you move on. Next would be defining the scope. So if I did want to go ahead and create that tic-tac-toe game, do I need a backend? Do I need a front end? Where am I going to get my data from? Do I need to store it? Am I going to store it on server side? Am I going to store it on browser side? All of these questions you'll have running through your head. Just make sure that you're writing those down so you have them, and then picking and choosing which ones you can fit in. And then if you're working on a team, or even if you're working by yourself, you're going to have to determine who's in charge of what. Obviously, people will have, a little bit more back-end skills. Some people might have some front-end skills. Some people might be designers. You're just really going to have to figure out what people want to do, how that fits in, and assign them to be in charge of certain tasks. The next thing is define the tasks that need to be completed. Now, obviously, you can kind of offload this onto those people. So, for example, if I was working on a team and I said, hey, I'll do the back end, I'll go ahead and define all the tasks that need to be completed. And then I'll check in with everybody else to make sure, are my tasks going to line up with what we want to accomplish as a team? Or if I'm working by myself, making sure that everything is going to accomplish my project objective. And then number 5, which is extremely important before we move on in any project, we need to make sure that we're not going to have any dependencies that will conflict with one another. So for example, if somebody says, well, I'm going to go ahead and test the app, and somebody says, okay, great, let me build it first. Those are 2 things that need to happen, one before the other. So making sure we're identifying those and making sure people aren't trying to do something before the data or the information or the app is already there. And then you're just going to determine how long every task is going to take. So going back to the scheduling, if your scope is too large and you're already saying, oh, this is going to take me 9 weeks to build, that's probably not doable for like a class project or even for this weekend. So making sure you can always go back and scope your problem and scope your objective to be something smaller so that you can go ahead and complete something to hand in on Sunday. And then I already kind of talked about it, but develop the schedule around that. So if you need to go back to any of these steps, you can always cycle back through. Obviously, as you cycle through, it'll take less time because you already have the scope. And if you have to scope it down or scope it up, you can obviously always do that. So these are some tools that I really like to use. I know 2 of them are super simple, but Google Sheets and Google Docs. Google Sheets, if you're like an Excel person and you really like, getting into like data pieces, that's probably going to be your best bet. Google Docs, this is a great place to collaborate with team members or other people, or even just with yourself so that you can keep everything organized, to go ahead and list out that project objective and get that scope defined and write any kind of use cases or requirements that you're going to have to handle. If you want to be a little bit more advanced and have some stuff on your GitHub, there is some really cool project management features that GitHub offers. So I'll go there. They have a Kanban board if you're familiar with like agile principles. It's very simple. It's nothing like Trello where you're going to have, all these different options for your story. They have it very simple, very organized. You can actually create this directly in your GitHub profile. It's public as well if you want to make it public. So people can see what you're working on and kind of like track where you are in your projects, which I've always thought was pretty cool. But this is a really good tool to use if you would like to be a little bit more organized, or if you're planning on working on this project after the hackathon's kind of over. This is also a great place to just dump ideas. So if you decide, hey, like 9 of these ideas are really cool for my app, but I just don't have time to do them this weekend, you can always just write up what your thoughts were and just leave them in your backlog, or just leave them in whatever column you create, which is a really great way of documenting, your ideas so you don't lose them in the future. And just as like a quick example, this is a project that I've been working on with one of my friends for class. Also, we were working on this kind of before class, but this was what we used to brainstorm and, really get our scope down and figure out what we wanted to do. Sorry, gotta log in. But as you can see, it's not really organized. This is perfectly fine. You turn this into another document for our own use, but project management doesn't have to always be organized. I know a lot of people like to think, oh, project managers are like the organized people, but in all reality, we just like to drop things on a board and then figure it out as we go along. So I think just like a software engineer, you kind of just start writing code and then you figure it out as you keep going. This is what you can do as well. And it'll help you just at least get your ideas down, scope your problem, see how big you want to go or how small you want to go. And this is just a really good example of, basically just a big brain dump that me and my partner did. So I have a question. Do you guys have any questions? Anything?
Okay. So for the people who like doing design work, what would be a good collaborative tool for them?
I would say Figma. Let me exit out of this. Yes. I know we use this at work. Hopefully this will come up with something good. So, file. Yeah. So Figma is a mocking tool. And by mocking, I mean, we're basically just drawing and designing the interface as we would like it coded or in code. So this is a really great tool. You can create teams, but I believe you have to pay for it. But you can share this with other people. So through a link, and you can give them editing power or viewing power, and you can go ahead and make beautiful interfaces here. So this is just an example of the same app that I just kind of showed you with the project ideas. You know, really bare bones. Right before we started coding, we just wanted to we wanted to have like a context in order to start coding. So this was kind of our dumping ground for that. Any other questions?
Are there any techniques that you used for facilitating brainstorming?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ones, and depending on the size of your group, I think that really impacts what technique you can use. In a smaller group, so anything under, I'd say 5, maybe 6, round robin, if everybody knows each other really well, is really helpful, just because you guys can just kind of like fire off ideas and turn them down or turn them up as you kind of go. Some other interesting ones would be, I do not know what the formal term for this was, but it's basically like stories within, you know, like Google Docs or anything like that. Somebody can basically put in, you know, hey, I was thinking we could do this, and then people can respond back with their ideas as well. So kind of like round robin, but a little more chaotic. If you guys have any like questions specifically about like anything other than project management or, you know, coding, feel free. I'll also post these slides with the links to like GitHub, project management, and all of that kind of stuff in the information channel. Would that be good, Emily?
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, I think either the information channel under hack-A-Thon, or you could also do the information channel under the general club, since some people might want this information.
Yep. I'll drop it in both, so they're there.
Somebody has a question.
Okay, is that in chat?
Yeah.
Okay, let me get to that. Chat. I like Figma. How do you handle conflict? That's a really good question. So when you have people that might have different ideas or schedules, so let me back up. So there's 2 types of conflict within project management that at least I see on a more daily, weekly basis. The first one is conflict of like resources. So, you know, you might have someone on your team that's a full stack software engineer. So you have to have them on front end and back end tasks. Obviously, both of those tasks can't be completed simultaneously by the same set of hands. So that kind of conflict is really interesting to deal with, especially if both of them can technically be advancing at the same time. In that case, you would really have to prioritize which one needs to get done first. And that's really going to depend on a number of factors. So if you're working in industry, what does your customer want first? Does it need the back end before the front end? Is the back end a little bit more important? A lot of those different things. And it's really important to ask your customer, or to ask yourself, if you are your own customer building your hack-A-Thon project, what's more important to me? What do I want to show to the judges? So that's one side of conflict. The other side of conflict is kind of competing scope, I guess might be a good way to say. Somebody wants to implement something on your team, and you know somebody else doesn't, dealing with that and trying to remedy where that falls. Now, a good thing to always look back for, because you have your scope defined, you can always say, okay, this is going to add to the scope, but is it going to affect what we already want to implement? So if somebody says, hey, I want to add the ability to reset a password, and you have authentication and authorization, that might be something that makes sense. Will it work within your schedule? That's something you're going to have to look at. And that's kind of another piece of conflict. I hope that answered your question.
Thanks.